The world has always had its share of dreamers and schemers, tinkerers and inventors. Some who had great ideas, but many more who missed the mark, were ahead of their time, or whose ideas were just plain bad. This is a nod to the off-kilter geniuses who have come up short on success. Now, failed inventions on Modern Marvels. Your television, the device you're glued to right now, is one of more than 1 billion sets manufactured in the last 6 decades. The average American stares at his or her TV more than 4 hours a day. That's 11 years for anyone who reaches the age of 80. You'd be hard-pressed to find an invention with a greater impact on modern society. But like many technological triumphs, the TV you know today followed in the footsteps of a flawed ancestor that flopped. In the 1920s, innovators developed a television that wasn't electronic, but mechanical. The pioneering system used no camera and no picture tube. It relied instead on lights and spinning wheels.
The concept of mechanical television was invented in the late 1800s, but at the time, the equipment didn't exist to make it a reality. So a fellow named John Logie Baird built the first successful system in 1926.
The technology underlying Baird's TV bore little resemblance to the electronics common now. Modern television systems begin with a camera that converts reflected light into electronic impulses on a grid of tens of thousands of receptors, called pixels. These tiny electrical measurements of light are transmitted one by one to your TV, where a tuner interprets and reassembles them using a cathode ray tube, or the more recent LCD and plasma screens. Like electronic television, mechanical television used a series of electric impulses of varying strengths. But the way they were captured and reconstructed was completely different. The mechanical television system transmitted images by passing light through tiny holes in a spinning wheel, one at a time, in rapid succession. These pinpoints of light bounced off the subject into a receptor, where they struck a photoelectric tube. The tube then converted the dots of light, which varied in intensity, into electronic signals of corresponding strength. At the receiver, these signals produced a series of rapid changes to the brightness of a light bulb. The light from this bulb passed through the holes of a disc identical to and spinning in sync with the transmitting wheel. The intermittent flashes of light reproduced the broadcast image. The earliest sets could produce only an indistinct picture like this. In case you can't make out the image, it's a pair of hands and a deck of cards. Look again and you might detect the image of the 6 of diamonds as it's positioned in the lower right of the screen. Beginning in 1928, retailers sold thousands of mechanical TVs. Viewers could watch up to 30 minutes of daily programming, broadcast from more than 30 experimental television stations in America and Great Britain. The picture improved a bit, but soon reached its modest technological peak.
Mechanical television eventually became a failed invention because it reached a dead end in terms of picture quality. It was not capable of producing decent quality pictures, and so it had really no entertainment value.
By the late 1940s, electronic television and its larger, sharper picture proved to be the system of the future. But in 1950, mechanical TV technology had one last shot at the big time. Engineers at CBS created a spinning wheel system for delivering high-quality color television, far superior to the first generation of electronic color TVs. But it had some significant and annoying drawbacks.
This is a mechanical color set from 1950. As you can hear, it's pretty noisy. It has a wheel that rotates in front of the screen with red, blue, and green filters in front of it. There's also a similar wheel at the TV camera. This set produces a nice picture, but for a 21-inch screen, it would require a 6-foot diameter wheel. Also, the set wasn't compatible with the black and white sets of the time, so all of those sets would have had to have been replaced.
And with that, mechanical television faded to black forever. Perhaps the greatest rival to television's impact on the American lifestyle is the automobile. Our love affair with cars spans a century of automotive progress, from Henry Ford's sputtering Model T to today's hybrids. We've always wanted to hit the road in style. And trying to feed that dream, free-thinking innovators have attempted to lure the public with exotic designs that fizzled. In 1933, futurist Buckminster Fuller was certain motorists couldn't resist the urge to toddle around town in this eggplant-shaped oddity. He called it the Dymaxion.
This was something that looked rather like the Oscar Mayer Wienermobile, a kind of bulbous, blimp-shaped vehicle.
He had his own ideas about car building. He didn't care about marketing stats or buyer profiles or styling trends. To him, this was not a radical design in any way. It was simply a very logical car.
Fuller's Dymaxion was aerodynamic and lightweight, featuring powerful front-wheel drive and a single rear wheel for superior maneuvering. Despite such advantages, however, the public never warmed to this radical design, and only 3 Dymaxions were ever built. Fuller pulled the plug on the project in 1934. But that didn't stop other designers, who, like Fuller, believed that 3 wheels were better than 4. This unique vehicle, called the Airmobile, first turned heads in 1937. It was the brainchild of Denver businessman Paul Lewis, and aircraft builders eager to bring an aerodynamic sleekness to the American road.
Well, he was going after a streamlined look. This automobile, again, with the 3-wheel configuration, gives it the opportunity to narrow it down, a nice teardrop effect, the same as the Dymaxion.
At a very competitive price of $550, how could this conversation piece car miss?
It was a failure. They produced this automobile for prototype purposes, toured the United States with it, putting about 45,000 miles on the vehicle, not gaining enough support to sell it, issue stock, and continue production, and it ended with this particular car.
In the 1960s, the Ford Motor Company was eager to show the public it was on the cutting edge of innovative design. Ford actually toyed with the notion of building a nuclear-powered engine. The Nucleon, as it was called, was to come complete with its own plutonium pod. But questions loomed about where to refuel and the potential dangers of driving a rolling nuclear reactor. And the Nucleon never made it past the 3-foot model stage. A more serious experiment was Chrysler's nearly 30-year odyssey to create a vehicle powered by a jet engine. October 1963 saw the arrival of Chrysler's new turbine-powered car. American-built engines were sheathed in a European-style body, co-designed with the Ghia Corporation's top Italian designers. The car's engine functioned by drawing air into the Chrysler's compressor, where temperature and air pressure were dramatically increased. The air was then forced into a burner, where it mixed with fuel, creating combustion. Heated gases then expanded through a series of turbine wheels to transform thermal energy into mechanical energy, turning the car's wheels. The turbine's power and handling were equal to anything else on the road. But its acceleration was sluggish because of its lag in engaging the transmission. But the car did have one fascinating feature. It ran on any combustible liquid: gasoline, perfume, even corn oil.
There's a whole story that at the proving grounds, they had poured scotch into the tank to see if they could make it run that way. When they were done running it, a couple of salty old mechanics in the garage were very unhappy that they wasted scotch in such a manner.
The project was finally deemed unfeasible because production costs would be too high. Another problem was developing new alloys able to withstand the turbine's high operating temperatures.
50 cars were built by Ghia of Italy in Turin. They sent these to the United States for evaluation. They were all fitted with the motor here in the United States. After 7 years, when the program was done, due to tax and customs reasons, all but 9 of the vehicles were destroyed.
Chrysler abandoned the turbine engine concept in 1981. Other automotive misfires were produced by entrepreneurs who set out to prove they could take on Detroit. One of these dreamers was Preston Tucker. a former designer for Ford. His plan was grand, some say foolhardy, to build a car company from the ground up.
Starting an automobile company from scratch in 1948 was actually a virtually impossible task because the capital required was so huge that nobody could come up with it.
Tucker's vision for his four-wheeled namesake was to make it the safest car on the road.
He designed this car, a rear-engine car. He put a lot of emphasis on safety, making a crush-proof passenger compartment and a pop-out windshield. And the idea was that in an accident, when you went forward into the windshield would pop out and you wouldn't cut yourself.
The Tucker's most memorable feature was the Triclops, a third headlight that turned with the steering wheel to continuously light the road ahead. But such innovations mattered little as Tucker began selling stock in his fledgling enterprise, and word spread that the government was investigating his business practices. Money quickly dried up. It's safe to say that more shares in Tucker's company were sold than actual Tucker automobiles. In all, only 50 were ever built. But surely the most unusual failed car design was the product of a German amphibious aircraft designer, Hans Trippler. He dubbed it the Amphicar. Beginning in 1960, Trippler exported nearly 3,000 of his Amphicars to the United States. Each Amphicar came with its own standard four-cylinder engine and a bilge pump. A false bottom floor protected electrical wiring. A dash-mounted switch engaged the twin propellers.
The Amphicar handles primarily like a car in the water, but consequently it handles pretty much like a boat on land. The twin propellers in the rear turn them in the same direction. Only one way can you turn pretty efficiently. The other way turns kind of like the Queen Mary.
Because the Amphicar cost nearly the same as a Mustang, the public faced a no-brainer. Cool muscle car or ugly duckling that was all wet.
The legacy will be a great idea that never was popularized enough and so never took off.
Undeterred, other inventors looked to bold new frontiers for their auto designs. For them, the future was up, up, and away. William Lear, inventor of the Learjet and the first practical car radio, spent the last decade of his life trying unsuccessfully to create a practical, steam-powered car. Failed inventions will return on Modern Marvels. More than a century has passed since two revolutionary inventions, the car and the airplane, redefined transportation and transformed our world. Over the decades, their combined clout has inspired many a fearless innovator to fuse them into one versatile vehicle. But merging two successful technologies can sometimes be a guaranteed formula for failure.
I think there's just something in the crackpot inventor that loves the idea of marrying two things that don't really go together. There are a number of flying car attempts over the years. Recently, someone tried to make a flying Pinto, which, with its history of fuel tank explosions, would seem to be doubly alarming.
Since 1917, more than 75 patents have been issued for flying cars. But only one, Mo Taylor's 1949 Aerocar, attained any lasting notoriety.
Moulton Taylor was inspired to build an Aerocar because he believed that in the period after World War II, there were lots of pilots and we had very congested highways. Very possibly, he could develop a flying car that would alleviate some of that ground congestion.
In the end, Taylor's ambitious design turned out to be a flop, both in the air and on the ground.
With the flying car, you had necessary compromises. The car itself was not particularly roadworthy. It wasn't heavy enough to be safe on the road. When you just put wings on this thing, you have a rather clunky airplane. The notion that just ordinary drivers would be flying around, particularly over major cities is alarming in itself. Same guys that cut you off on the highway at 65 miles an hour would instead be cutting you off at 10,000 feet.
Still, the Aerocar had some unique features. It was the first American rear-engine car with front-wheel drive. The drive shaft powered the pusher prop, while the rear wheels were allowed to spin freely, a critical feature for smooth landings. An earlier version of a flying car, Robert Fulton's 1946 Airphibian, had a single cumbersome engine and wing unit.
But unfortunately, it's an invention whose time has not yet come, and it never really gets off the ground.
Mo Taylor's Aerocar, on the other hand, strove to keep travel flexible with its foldable and towable wings. If you flew into a storm, you could land, stow your wings, and take off when the weather cleared. And taking off was easy, because the Aerocar required only a standard small craft runway. But red tape kept it mostly grounded.
The market is too small to build a flying car where you have to be a pilot, a driver, you have to have an FAA medical, you have to have all the other licenses to operate radios and things like that.
The high price tag and the inconvenience of attaching and reattaching wings also helped kill the dream of flying cars for the masses. Just 5 Aerocars were ever built, leaving us with only the fantasy of flying out of gridlock. Another flying flop was the U.S. Air Force's very own flying saucer, a 2-man craft christened the Avro. Trying to capitalize on emerging jet technology, the Air Force spent nearly $12 million trying to get the futuristic Avro airborne. Its 3 turbine fans were designed to hover at altitudes exceeding 10,000 feet. The 927 pounds of thrust from the Continental turbo power plants were directed downward via internal shafts. The Avro was also fitted with a special side-mounted venting system to provide additional lateral control to prevent tipping. Engineers were never able to completely control the unwieldy Avro during untethered flights, or to get it to lift more than several inches off the ground. Barely able to cross even small ditches, the Air Force's flying saucer was a hovering dud, whose only close encounter was with failure. In the late 1940s, the Air Force had tinkered with another flight of fancy, called the F-85 Goblin. Short, fat, and squat with foldable wings, the Goblin was a jet fighter with a design only its mother could love. The plan was for a bomber to carry the Goblin in its belly, then lower it by trapeze and launch it into battle when the bomber came under attack. But the Goblin proved to be as aerodynamically unstable as it was homely. In docking tests with a converted B-29, pilots found it impossible to reconnect with the trapeze. When several tests ended in mid-air mishaps, the Air Force canceled the program, and this little flying spook vanished into obscurity. But perhaps the most visible failed flying invention of the last century was the rocket belt. There have been several incarnations over the years. The first was built at Bell Jet Labs. The most famous version was designed and built by Hollywood cameraman Nelson Tyler, whose rocket belt flew over the 1984 Olympics.
The whole thing is controlled with these arms that come out. You've got a throttle to go up and down. Move the stick up and down. You fly forward and aft, sideways. You twist this. It's a fun thing. It's pretty hard to fly. It's hard to learn and train because you only have 20 seconds at a time to do it. If the rocket belt fails, you just fall like a brick. Except you fall with this thing on your back and all this fuel so that when you crash, you burn, you know.
The rocket belt is powered by a specially formulated 90% pure hydrogen peroxide mix. Forced under pressure through a series of fine silver meshes, a chemical reaction is produced that creates heat, water, and 300 pounds of steam-powered thrust. The original military mission of the rocket belt was to provide soldiers with a means of aerial reconnaissance, an easy mode of travel over difficult terrain, and a stable weapons firing platform. The rocket belt failed on all counts. It was too loud for spying, held only enough fuel for 21-second trips, and was too complex to fly and fire weapons at the same time. And what kind of weapons would a rocket man fire? Leave it to the military to cook up some colossal ballistic failures, like the handy-dandy nuclear rifle. Guns, bombs, and tanks. When innovation occurs on the battlefield, the results can be advantage and victory, or disaster and defeat. In war, you can't be too many steps ahead of the enemy.
Unfortunately, through our history, we've been a little bit behind. For instance, in World War II, we entered World War II with what we thought was a pretty good tank, the M4 Sherman tank. It proved to be pretty much of a disaster on the battlefield. The thing about it was, though, that we made 55,000 of them.
The problem was the Sherman's armor, which proved exceptionally vulnerable to the high-velocity guns of German tanks. A single hit could penetrate to the Sherman's ammunition stowage areas and set the tank instantly on fire. GIs nicknamed the Sherman the Ronson, after the cigarette lighter guaranteed to light the first time every time.
The Germans, if they hit you at that range, you'd burn. Going tank on tank with the Germans was not a good idea because their tanks were technologically superior. So the standard tactic was to take 5 Shermans to go after one Panther, maneuver around to his flank and shoot him in the side, or better still, shoot him in the rear, or even better, call up the Air Force and rocket him.
As the Americans found ways to work around the Sherman's design flaws, the Germans had to cope with their own duds on the battlefield. One was this problematic little giant called Goliath. Conceptually, the idea was sound. It was a remote-controlled mini-tank that could roll under a full-size tank or up to a gunner's pillbox and explode. It was, in essence, a mobile remote-controlled bomb.
Back here we have the coil of 2,000 yards of cable. The center has the engine, which is a 2-cycle, 2-cylinder gasoline engine. In the front we have the 125 pounds of explosives behind 9mm plate steel.
2 major flaws made Goliath vulnerable: its slow pace and its thin armor.
The metal is 16-gauge soft steel. As it's coming at the bunker, a .30 caliber bullet will penetrate this thing and cause it to malfunction.
The Goliath's greatest drawback, perhaps, was that its operator was required to stand exposed on the battlefield, in full view of both the tiny explosive tank and the target.
Being the operator of the Goliath was not a good job. You could get shot doing it.
2 wars later, inventors looked to rocket power to stop the enemy. This may look like a toy, but any soldier wielding it wasn't playing games. Developed for use in Vietnam, this gyrojet pistol was designed to fire 13mm rockets that could pierce stainless steel. These self-propelled projectiles promised all kinds of advantages.
You can use it in outer space and you can use it underwater.
Its mechanism is unlike any other firearm. When a conventional gun is fired, all the pressure from the exploding powder is held in the chamber.
Good!
The pressure propels the bullet forward, after which the bullet starts losing velocity.
A winner!
The gyrojet round, on the other hand, is pushed by a burning solid rocket propellant contained within the projectile. All the pressure is contained by the bullet and not by the gun. In a bit of backward design, the gyrojet hammer strikes the nose of the rocket instead of the butt. This drives the rocket back onto the firing pin, which ignites it. As the rocket launches forward on the hammer, it recocks the weapon. By the time it had traveled 100 yards, the rocket bullet was designed to be 50% more powerful than a slug from a .45. But often the rocket started off so slowly that it couldn't overcome the spring tension of the hammer in its way.
If you did not overcome the spring pressure on this, what would happen is the rocket would get to the muzzle of the weapon and fall out the end of the weapon. Because it is a rocket, it has to get up to speed. And if you shoot someone up close with it, it's not moving fast enough to inflict a wound. It may tend to bounce off. So if you shoot someone about 3 feet away, it may just bounce off of them. This is a real hunk of junk.
The Gyrojet pistol is just one of the most recent in a long line of attempts to improve the basic firearm. During World War I, the Allies needed a lot of machine guns in a hurry. The French responded by hastily mass-producing more than 250,000 of these Chauchat light machine guns. They gave new meaning to the word unreliable.
This is one of the horrors of war. What happened was they got real sloppy in their assembly of these things, and you can't take the parts off one and put them on another and make it work.
One of the Chauchat's most critical design flaws was a window in the ammunition chamber. It enabled soldiers to keep track of the number of rounds in the weapon, but it left the inner workings of the gun exposed to the dirt, mud, and muck of trench warfare. The Chauchat jammed constantly.
I interviewed an old gentleman many years ago who was in the First World War, and I asked him what kind of weapon he had. He said, I had that French Chauchat, and I asked him, well, how was it? How'd you like it? And he said, well, it wasn't worth a tinker's damn, but you could take some parts off it and make a still.
If there were a military failed inventions hall of fame, there would surely be a place of honor for the nuclear rifle, developed in the Cold War 60s, the M65. Yes, you heard correctly. This is a nuclear rifle.
This is a M65 155 millimeter recoilless rifle with a .01 kiloton nuclear warhead on the end of it. The recoilless rifle works from the rear. You load it back here. It fires a projectile up through, launching the nuclear warhead up to 3 miles.
This giant rifle promised to make Armageddon easy and portable. Nicknamed the Davy Crockett, it could take down more than bears. It could take out the entire forest, and then some. Its 51-pound nuclear payload was 2 to 4 times more powerful than the ammonium nitrate bomb that destroyed the Oklahoma City Federal Building in 1995.
It's either hand-carried on foot or by a Jeep. It was tested in 1962. Just so happens that Robert F. Kennedy was in attendance at the time.
The Davy Crockett was hampered by one nagging flaw that may have just prevented the proliferation of portable nukes. Its maximum firing range of about 3 miles meant it couldn't fire its payload beyond the radius of the resulting nuclear fallout.
When the weapon is detonated, it creates a cloud. If the wind is blowing toward the crew becomes irradiated from this radioactive cloud.
The crew, to use a medieval expression, was hoist on their own petard. They were within the blast radius of the nuclear warhead, and they were going to get radiation from that. So, a desperation weapon at best.
Exposure to radiation hasn't always been considered the health hazard it is today. At the turn of the 20th century, patients were lining up at the doctor's office to be treated by a new crop of inventions that absolutely radiated with the promise of miracle cures. The field of medicine has produced the lion's share of failed inventions. And until 2002, Minneapolis collector Bob McCoy showcased more than 250,000 bizarre gadgets at his Museum of Questionable Medical Devices. The discovery of the radioactive element radium in 1898 spawned dozens of lethal medical inventions.
People wonder why there are so many radium inventions. I think it's because it was a popular thing at the beginning of the 20th century. It had a certain sense of vitality and energy. Not only did they sell radium products thinking they're going to make you healthy, they also tied it in with sexuality. They were making radioactive athletic supporters for weak, sagging men. They were drying out boars' testicles and making them radioactive to improve your romantic talent. They were making radium suppositories for men or women. A whole line of goofy stuff like this were being sold.
Fast talkers attributed all manner of benefits to this hot fad.
The beginning of the 20th century, radium was big business. It was imported, for the most part, from Europe. Here's a grocery store selling radioactive water, claiming you have the invisible hand of Mother Nature in your body to make you healthy. This was called the Cosmos radioactive pad, marketed to people who had arthritis, with a promise that it relieved the pain of arthritis. Oddly enough, on the back it says, warning, do not open this and eat the contents of this bag. Who would want to eat a bag of radium? This is a device called the Revigator. It's a standard crock, but it's lined with radium on the inside walls to make your water radioactive. It didn't promise any medical cures, it just made you feel good. Why go to spas in Europe when you can stay home and drink this wonderful radioactive water? All of this was going fine until a fellow in Pittsburgh began marketing these little bottles of Radiator to improve your romantic talent. A man in Pittsburgh drank 1,400 bottles of this. His upper and lower jaw fell off. That's when they realized this radium cannot be sold willy-nilly, that it was dangerous.
Like radium, the X-ray also spawned a host of potentially lethal creations.
The X-ray is discovered in 1896 and put into use almost immediately, and it seems miraculous to people. But then, as often happens with these technologies, they get a little warped and people begin loading on more expectations on top of them. Things snowball and go skidding off the road and become ludicrous at best and sometimes lethal at worst.
Yes, in the early 1920s, when X-ray became popular, physicians, unfortunately, had X-rays in their offices in which the tube is exposed. They're standing behind patients looking up and down with a fluoroscope. That injured and killed many physicians from long exposure to Röntgen rays. Then they went to X-ray machines that would remove superfluous hair. A fellow invented a machine that would remove superfluous hair. Women sat in front of this, an average of 20 treatments at $10 a treatment. It killed hundreds of women, injured thousands.
In the 1940s and 50s, unsuspecting shoe buyers also exposed themselves to harmful doses of X-rays. The culprit this time was the Adrian shoe fitting machine, designed to determine a customer's precise size.
The appeal was to see your own toes wiggling in your shoes and seeing, oh, those are my toes, and to see if your shoes were too narrow or too short or too wide or too long.
The company in Milwaukee produced about 10,000 of these things, and even though they were lead-lined, there was no lead shielding around either the ports into which you put your feet or the various viewing ports. It had 3 of them, one for the customer, one for the shoe salesman, and one for parents in case they were buying shoes for their child. The amount of X-ray leakage is rather alarming.
Once radiation leakage was confirmed in 1950, the government ordered the machines destroyed. Like the X-ray, electricity inspired scads of misguided medical applications. This mysterious force made possible such health aids as the prostate gland warmer.
It was patented in 1918. It's supposed to excite a man's abdominal brain. Did you know men had abdominal brains? The U.S. Patent Office says we do. Now, the wattage of this bulb controls how warm this will be. This is a 25-watt bulb, and this doesn't get too hot. Actually, this didn't do anything.
Of equally dubious value was the spectrochrome. Inventor Dinshaw Gadiali developed this device in the 1920s to cure a variety of maladies. He theorized that exposing the afflicted to the spectrochrome's colored lights could cure or relieve them of more than 280 different ailments.
It's a big aluminum cabinet on a stand, and it has 8 different colored lights on it. They're well made, they have a fan in them, and people like to sit in the colored lights. But to make it work, the patient has to sit in front of this in the dark, facing north, under certain moon phases in the nude.
Green light was purported to be a pituitary stimulant. Yellow, a nerve builder. Red was said to energize the liver.
If you had pancreatic cancer, for instance, you use the lemon and indigo lights. Well, if you have pancreatic cancer, no colored lights are going to cure you.
The spectrochrome succeeded only in infusing those wealthy enough to afford the device with false hope. Perhaps the oddest product ever marketed to the more health-conscious consumer was the smokeless cigarette. In 1988, the R.J. Reynolds Company introduced the Premier, as a revolutionary nicotine delivery system.
The notion was a smokeless cigarette that wouldn't involve burning tobacco, but rather a element that would produce the flavor of tobacco in your mouth through a plastic tube. Sucking on this thing, they said, was enough to promote a hernia. The taste of it was compared to burning lettuce. Even the president of R.J. Reynolds admitted that the Premier tasted like crap.
Consumer apathy quickly extinguished the Premier, and more than $300 million in research and marketing costs went up in smoke. The track record of investors trying to predict consumer trends has always been spotty at best. Their vision of our future has included robots and spaceship-shaped houses. What happened? In 1997, the FDA halted sales of the Stimulator, a handheld igniter for gas grills, marketed as a pain reliever. Consumers purchased 800,000 stimulators at a cost of $65 million. Failed inventions will return on Modern Marvels. Creating a vision of tomorrow and the homes we'll inhabit has proven to be a challenge that most inventors never quite overcome. For decades, major corporations have used the House of the Future as a promotional tool to showcase an array of magical devices.
Come see the home of tomorrow. Well, we're often drawn to it as a kind of a spectacular piece of entertainment, but nobody really wants to live in something that looks like that. People just wanted something that looked like everybody else's.
But who wouldn't want to live in an easy-to-clean plastic house, equipped with high-tech toasters hidden in special space-saving compartments, conveyor belts that whisk away dirty dishes to sterilizers, and levitating frying pans?
I think even when their inventions don't really happen, they've always provided us with something to think about.
One invention inhabiting the house of tomorrow could think for itself.
I can perform 36 separate and distinct acts.
Anyone out there knows of a mechanical woman who is looking for a boyfriend?
We're still waiting around, most of us. I don't know if you've got one, but I think we're still waiting around for our own personal robots to hang around our house and serve us our coffee in the morning and take the dog for a walk. All of those things were supposed to have been here by now, and they're not.
But if the House of the Future hasn't quite arrived yet, it hasn't been for a lack of trying. In 1969, homeowners could consider settling down in their own UFO. The Futuro house, made entirely of reinforced plastic, was the brainchild of Finnish architect Mutti Sironen. Investors who financed construction of the units were banking on the public's fascination with a space race between the United States and the Soviet Union. They reasoned that homeowners might want to experience a little out-of-this-world living. But the public rejected this far-out design, and only 20 Futuros were ever made. The Futuro had a not-so-distant ancestor from the 1940s. This Dymaxion house was Buckminster Fuller's bookend to his futuristic Dymaxion car. Michigan's Henry Ford Museum contains the only remaining model, here seen under reconstruction for public display.
After World War II, there was everybody and his brother trying to get in and make a buck off the housing shortage. But Fuller had a totally different idea to revolutionize the housing industry, both factory production and a completely new engineering concept, the Dymaxion house, which stood for dynamic maximum tension.
The exterior of the Dymaxion house consisted of lightweight and easy-to-ship aluminum, made by an aircraft manufacturer. The entire home could be delivered in a single tube. Fuller's concept defied the conventional notion of a house that rests on a foundation. Instead, a central mast, planted firmly in the ground, suspended the house's aluminum skin and floor. Tethered by cables to the surrounding ground, the structure was surprisingly stable. The cost of a new Dymaxion house was $6,500. Its 2 bedrooms each had their own tiny prefab bathrooms.
As you can see, when we look inside the bathroom, it's kind of a small space. It's not what we think of as a bathroom today. It's a little bit close in there, folks.
The bedrooms also featured revolving shelving units to maximize the limited space. The Dymaxion, like the Futuro, failed in part because it was so different. Its one-size-fits-all floor plan made add-ons impossible for growing families. The house's round shape also gave homeowners headaches, as they struggled to fit square bookcases and couches into their new round world. But Fuller may have had the last laugh on consumers who felt they had to have corners for their couches. His later geodesic dome concept, while never a popular floor plan for homes, can be found all over the world in the form of theaters, churches, exhibition sites, and museums.
I think when we look at a lot of failed inventions or innovations that went nowhere, we are tempted to see it as a history of failure. But that's not really what it is at all. In fact, these are kind of testimonies to the human spirit. Without the courage to fail, without the courage to try something that may or may not work, we'd never enjoy the progress that we have.
No matter that these ideas fell short of their intended goals, the world has a special place in its heart for forward thinkers, tinkerers, and daydreamers who march to the beat of their own drums. Although many of the inventions they've devised have failed miserably, the creative spark, no matter how dim, deserves the occasional nod of recognition.